We ready to go?
Yep. Looks like we're
Hello,
live.
everyone. Hello, everyone. This is PA and Associates Consulting Group. We're here today to talk about a very important topic, especially in a lot of communities out there. We're talking about the school to prison pipeline, the discipline gap. My name is Gregory Kelly, co-founder of PA and Associates Consulting Group. We are also here with Dr. PA and Tony Copeland. I'll give them an opportunity to uh, to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Yolanda PA. I'm the founder of PA and Associates. I want to thank everybody for joining us today as we talk about this very important topic about the school to prison pipeline.
Tony.
My name is Tony Copeland. I know they invited me on here as a special guest, just giving some of my background from me being incarcerated. And I feel like I can have an impact and some very useful information to help people make better decisions and understand the ramification of the decision if they do decide to follow in the footsteps and the path of that thug or gangster lifestyle, quote unquote.
Okay. I'd like to thank all viewers for joining us. I would like to ask them to say hello in the comments. If you have any comments, answers to questions, please just put them in the chat box. And we're ready to go.
All right.
So first, let me first start off that PA and Associates Consulting Group. Um, we see that there's a problem in our communities, with our families and our school systems, and these are just one of the topics that we're going to touch on to come up with solutions to these problems. All right. So that's the purpose of the presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the topics that we're going to cover. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to really talk about what the school to prison pipeline is. We're going to discuss why it's a problem. And then we're going to really dive into how schools contribute to it. And then we'll talk about what effects it has on inner city communities and disadvantaged youth. We'll give you some solutions, and then we'll take time at the end to let everybody ask questions, and we can give our answers.
First, a broken educational system, the discipline gap. Students of color often face unfair disciplinary treatment in schools by taking a band-aid approach to discipline. Educators who teach and lead at urban schools often contribute to the school to prison pipeline.
So the one thing that I want to say is that when I started to research this topic, I had no idea that it was actually a such thing as a discipline gap. We've heard of the achievement gap before, and that's basically where students of color score exceptionally lower than their white counterparts. So the discipline gap is almost like the same thing, but it's about discipline. Now I want to expand on a Band-Aid approach and what I mean by that. I mean like quick fixes. So like if you have a student or a child that's constantly being removed from the classroom and the issue isn't being addressed and it's just happening over and over and over again, it's more than likely going to lead to suspension, which will more than likely lead to expulsion, which will more than likely lead to the school to prison pipeline. So I just wanted to make sure that I took some time to differentiate and compare the two.
Okay. We also want to talk about the importance of parent advocacy. Um, we think parents have to get involved with their children's schooling. They need to know what's going on. They need to be the number one advocate in their child's life in order for successful career as far as matriculating through school.
Mm-hmm. And we need our parents to know that they actually have rights. It is your right to advocate for your child and make sure that they get the education that they deserve. And all students deserve an equitable quality education, which will ultimately lead them to success. All right, Greg, you want to introduce the first item?
All right, our first question: what makes our educational system broken?
Ooh. All right. So I think that what really makes our educational system broken, and I know, Greg, we talked about this a little bit, is the fact that it sets up our students for failure. And it's not like it's done as a mistake. It's literally set up that way. So I can't even really say that there's a glitch that's there. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. So the only way that we can really help fight against it and make sure that our kids get the education that they need is to advocate for our kids and really just be informed about what's actually happening in the school system. So this is one of the major reasons why we decided to do this presentation today. Anybody else want to chime in before I go? All right.
I think being a history major is a bunch of reasons why our system is broken, and too long to list. But this is a topic that like we could spend hours on. The reason why our system is broken.
I agree with you, Greg. I think being a part of this system, like growing up, you know, in the inner city, attending inner city schools, and then actually teaching in inner city schools and leading an inner city school, it gives you a different perspective as far as what's happening and why it's happening. So I do agree. We could probably go on for days about why it's broken. Today we're just discussing one of those reasons, and it's a major reason because it really impacts our community. So it's good that we're starting here. All right, so what is the school to prison pipeline? The school to prison pipeline refers to policies and practices that push children, especially minorities, out of schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice system. Now, this school to prison pipeline also refers to students who come from poverty, students with disabilities, all being pushed out of schools and forced into juvenile and criminal justice systems at an alarming rate. And one of the major things that contributes to the school to prison pipeline is zero tolerance. And we're going to talk about what zero tolerance is and how it increases the chances of students of color, students with disabilities, students who grew up in poverty, students who are disadvantaged, how they end up being pushed into the criminal justice system. And the quote on the side says, many under-resourced schools become pipeline gateways for placing increased reliance on police rather than teachers and administrators to maintain discipline. And that's one of the things that is actually happening right now, but we'll talk about that later. And is that okay? Is that not okay? So the first question is the school to prison pipeline a myth? What's your thoughts?
Definitely not. It's definitely not a myth at all. Everybody know a lack of education already puts you at a disadvantage. So if they're not even getting the right type of education or getting pushed in the right direction, that's dramatically increasing their chance of ending up in prison.
And it's crazy because doing the research and you find out that there's actually people out here who believe that it's a myth, like it doesn't really exist. All right, so the next question is, does zero tolerance prepare students for the real world?
I would say no. I think people are going to make mistakes, right? So we got to be flexible, right? I do believe in rules, but I think there need to be some flexibility, and because they're kids, right? Mm-hmm. So kids is going to make mistakes.
And just piggybacking off of what you're saying, Greg, I know we dealt with this a lot where we were prior to where we are now with PA and Associates, but students come with different degrees of issues and challenges. And if we completely disregard what they're bringing to school and just give them the same punishment across the board, it's really just a Band-Aid approach, right? If you're not really figuring out what the issue is and trying to solve the issue, then it's just going to keep repeating itself. It's going to happen over and over again. So I think it's important to be cognizant about what our students are actually bringing with them. It's not like they drop everything when they walk in our doors in the school building. They're bringing it with them to the classroom, and it's going to show up in their behavior.
Yes.
All right. What other ways do schools set up students for failure? Because this isn't the only way, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying that this is a major contributor to it, right? But what other ways can you think of that schools actually set students up to fail instead of succeed?
I think one of the things that, and I don't know if y'all discussed it, but something that stands out to me is like happened like back, I'll say in the 1990s, early 2000, is when they really stop allowing parents to discipline their kids to come in. Like if you came into school and you gave your kid a whooping or a popping for doing something wrong, they basically try to take the parent out of the picture and put CPS on them.
Mm-hmm.
So they very strategic with their moves, and then they go zero tolerance, or they're like, well, this kid is uncontrollable. You can't do nothing with him. Well, you stop allowing the parent to implement some type of parenting or discipline at home to let them know what's right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of like what happened to it takes a village to raise a child, right? I remember growing up and it didn't matter. If I was acting up outside and, you know, my neighbor knew that I was doing it, they would chastise me. It is what it is. And my mother would be okay with them doing that. I think that's a bigger part of the problem too. Greg, do you want to speak on the CPS point that he made?
Well, I'm currently a child protection worker, and one thing I always tell parents, right? You can physically discipline your kids. You just can't leave marks or bruises,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of people would tell people, no, you can't, but you can. You just can't leave marks or bruises. And I also think other ways is like lack of funding, poor planning, um, administrators or teachers not properly trained to educate our kids. So those are other factors.
Yeah, it's just crazy to me because it's like they take that away, and then I might be getting a little ahead of the program or the presentation. Is they take all that away, and then they throw police officers in there to discipline, to put them in jail. Basically, you're doing something, so y'all stop allowing the parent to give them repercussions, to introduce an authority figure to threaten them.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's all a part of the system, right? And this is and thinking about what you just said, right? This is a major way that they actually, how schools set our kids up for failure, like on purpose. Oh, and I want to piggyback off of that and just say that this is one of the reasons why I know I spoke in my video earlier this week about just being proactive and being ahead of the game, because what you don't want to happen is for it to get out of control. And then now they're coming up ways to solve the problem and they're not including you in that conversation. You want to make sure that you advocate for your kid. And if you know that your kid is going to school and they're having these challenges and that sort of thing, you want to deal with it at home. You want to work with the school to deal with it, to make sure that you have a plan in place so that it doesn't get to that point. Because like I said before, you have rights.
Dr. PA, I'm going to add in, I'm looking at the chat box. We have Steve McMillan, and he says cultural my daughter's in the background trying to tell me something. Being insensitive.
Definitely. Insensitive in a way where we're not really thinking about what our students are bringing to the table, like what are they coming to school with? And if you're not aware of what they're bringing and the challenges that they're facing in the community, and it always amazes me because how can you work within a community and not have an understanding of what's actually happening in that community and what these students are actually facing outside of those school doors? Because it's going to affect their education. It's going to affect their behavior in school. It's going to affect a lot of things. So you can't really just ignore it, you know, and not understand the culture even a little bit to be able to relate to students and actually build those relationships that you need to build in order to make a difference. And I don't care what nobody says, I will debate with you all day and all night about why it's important to build meaningful relationships with the students that you serve. Yes, teaching is a job. You go in, you get it done, you get home, but I will debate you in the fact that you cannot do it effectively if you are not building relationships with the students that you serve, and if you don't care about those students that you serve, or if you're not aware of their culture in any way, shape, or form. It's just not going to work.
But I think, you know, it's crazy because we're talking about culture, and that was a good point that was brought up. But culture and sensitivity, and basically what I'm saying, they don't even teach the culture in the school. Like, really, they don't really teach us about our history or our culture or our beginning. Like, and I'm not going to turn it into that, and that's another debate, but I just will leave it there, though. And I think that's something that need to be added to the curriculum in the school system, is let our people know about people of color, or any race, though, really. Let them know about their culture and the truth, though, because a lot of that stuff that they teach is not even truthful.
That part.
And it also gives you a sense of pride, right? To know where you come from. You know, a lot of times, whether our communities, you look outside and it may look bleak, but if you know from where you come from, right? The people that shoulders that you're standing on that have made tremendous strides, right? It brings a sense of pride, right? So I think it needs to be incorporated in a school system.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that I do want to say, and just piggyback off of what Tony said, is talking about like culturally relevant pedagogy, and that's actually having an understanding of the culture of the students that you have, and then also embedding that into curriculum, different ways that you can differentiate within the classroom. So my hats are off to those teachers who actually make an effort to do that in the classroom, especially when it comes to lesson planning and all that, because it's not an easy job, but it's something that really needs to be done if we're going to really, make sure that our kids are successful. That's important. They need something to relate to, and they need to be taught the truth about history, not that it started with slavery. And I'm sure that we could use this whole time to just go over, the different things that needs to happen in the classroom and why it isn't happening and everything else. But it's at least a starting point to talk about why it's important and why it needs to be done. I think we can all agree to that. All right. So we talked a little bit about zero tolerance, and I really want to dive in and talk about how it all started. So the establishment of zero tolerance policies began in the 1980s. At the time, these policies primarily dealt with major offenses involving weapons and drugs. The term was first introduced by the Reagan administration when the president launched his war on drugs. When the federal government passed the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act of 1989, zero tolerance policies actually became law. So that's where it all started. That's how it all began. And on the other side, you can see that there are some examples of what zero tolerance is. So an example would be a school has a no weapons policy, and a student receives the same consequence for bringing sharp nail clippers to school as a student who brings a pocket knife. So it doesn't matter what actually happened. You violated that rule. This is the consequence for it. That's an example of zero tolerance. A zero tolerance terrorist threat policy can mean that a student who yells, "I'm going to kill you," and just on the playground during recess can receive the same penalty as a student who calls in a bomb threat to the school. That's an example of zero tolerance. Or a school has a rule that no students may create replicas in any way of guns, whether for play or in seriousness. One student pretends to play by shaping his hand into a gun during recess time, while another student brings a replica gun to school and brandishes it as he's going to shoot a classmate. Both students receive the same punishment. That's zero tolerance.
Hey, Dr. Pierre, I want to add, like Steve is right on point with this. He says we are punishing kids for being aggressive, and they come from aggressive backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Instead of determining ways to channel their aggression into other things and not just sports.
Yep.
They call it redirecting, but they don't have the patience to do it effectively.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this is one of those Band-Aid approach things, right? Not even understanding, and also going back to culture, not even understanding that they come from an environment where we are aggressive. That's what we do. So why would they think anything different being in the classroom? Yet and still they're being punished for who they are and where they come from. He's definitely on point with that example, definitely on point with that. And it's not fair, but that goes back to really understanding the kids that you serve, their backgrounds, and having relationships as well with the community and with these families. That's important too. Another reason why zero tolerance doesn't work.
One thing that stuck to me in that point is not just sports. We are so much more than football players or basketball players, right? So why not channel our kids in other ways, whether it be learning how to deal with your emotions, right? Mm-hmm. With that aggressiveness, right? Arts, right? We have gone away from the arts programs, right? So it's other ways that we could channel our kids to deal with some of this aggressive behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So our first question is, how is zero tolerance policies similar to expectations in prison or in the juvenile system?
Well, I think it's pretty much the same, right? You do something wrong, right? And there's a consequence for that, right? There's, no wiggle room, right? Or alternatives, right? So I think it's
Alternatives.
pretty much similar.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like this is a primary reason how we're like setting them up for it, right? Because in school, in reality, you should have the resources and you should have the people in place to really not have to just result to a band-aid approach to discipline. So by not doing that, you're basically setting them up for incarceration because that's what they're going to actually experience if they actually end up there.
They
So that's a really
basically
good point.
desensitize. Oh, excuse me.
I'm finished. Go ahead.
They desensitizing them to they making it seem normal. Like they putting this presence, like you feel like a zero time, like that's okay. And that's the mindset as you dealing with a child. They start to develop that. You start feeling like, oh, okay, it's nothing. Then as a culture, we start to like look at that as a badge of honor. Like, oh, okay, I got in trouble. Oh, now you're the popular kid. So I feel like it's the mindset, dealing with them putting the presence there. They desensitizing people to that. Then they allowing the kids to get used to that, and then that become like a way of life. It becomes a normal. If that makes any sense, what
It
I'm trying to
does.
say.
It makes perfect sense. It's almost like a learned behavior, right? So, say if I'm having issues with math, right? But if I know I act up in class, right, I don't have to confront those issues, right? So now you're going to take me out of the classroom, and that's what I wanted in the whole first. I wanted that, right? Because I can't do the math, right? So kids learn that if I do something negative, I'm gonna, in a sense, get what I want, right? I don't have to face those challenges, right? And that's an easy way out.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And you would think that the most obvious thing to do would be to help these students, right? Regulate their feelings and understand what their emotions are and that sort of thing. And I know I might be going ahead of the game too, because we're going to talk a little bit about generational trauma and everything like that. But I am telling you that there are things and resources that you can implement in schools to help these students actually deal with what they're feeling and not react in the same way. And one of the major things that I think that we forget is that when you tell a student, okay, you're acting up, just don't do that. It doesn't work. You have to replace unwanted behaviors with wanted behaviors. You cannot just tell them not to do it. That's not enough. They're going to need as much time as they had to learn that behavior to unlearn it and replace it with another one. So that's important to realize too. But I think that those Band-Aid approaches is the reason why it's not actually happening. It's easier to just have a student removed from the classroom. It's easier to have a student removed from a school building and out of the system and just place them into prison. It's the easiest thing to do.
Hey, Dr. Pierre, let's talk about the importance of having a copy, reading the copy
Oh.
of your child's school code of conduct.
Mm-hmm. You know, you get those codes of conduct where you're supposed to get a copy at the beginning of every school year, and they'll ask you to sign off on it. Do not sign off on it if you did not receive it. You need to understand your rights as a parent, and then you need to also understand what the school's expectations are. Because sometimes if you're not aware of it and you have this code of conduct and then something happens with your child, they can do something completely different than what's in that code of conduct. So you have to make sure that you become familiar with it, that you're involved in that process. If they're having meetings to talk about it, or to redo it or add or take anything away to it, make sure that you have a role in that because your child is going to be affected. We like to think that, oh no, not my kid, until you get in that position. And now it's like you against the school, when if you were proactive, you could have had those relationships in the beginning and then it would influence what actually happened with your kids. So please, please, please be familiar with your school's expectations and that code of conduct. That's going to be your like saving grace right there.
I would like to add something to that though as well though. Mm-hmm. I think now when y'all speaking of the code of conduct and when people sign things and they just sign it without reading it, but they don't even understand, like you're signing basically like a contract. So you're basically giving the school the right to handle your child in that way.
Yep. You're absolutely
so that's a very important point. Like the parents need to understand when you're signing something, that's a documentation. So you need to read it and just not push it off. And I'm not speaking from experience. I'm speaking from an experience Unfortunately, I wasn't there for most of my son's life, but those are things that I think about for other people that doesn't have to go through that or that are in their child's life now, to just pay attention to the small things, because they'll lead up to bigger things if you don't.
Mhm. Good point.
I think another point also is we need to review this code of conduct with your child. Your child need to understand like these are the rules that they're gonna try to hold you to, and here are the consequences if you break some of those rules.
Mhm. And then if they're not doing that, ask them. Request a meeting, right? I
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to sit down with the dean of students, with the principal, whoever it is, and I want to go over, this code of conduct or specific items in this code of conduct that I don't understand and how it applies to my child when they're at school. But that's all about advocating, right?
And like some of the things I would like, where's the evidence? Who are the people that's saying this, right? Is there video of this, right? These are things that you want to ask instead of just basically going taking off a one person
Yeah.
report. I'm looking at the comments, and we have Valerie. She's saying parents should be more involved, and kids need to know that teachers care about them.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. They really do. They need to know that they care.
They need that energy.
Mm-hmm. And I'm happy you brought that up, because I think that a lot of teachers aren't aware. We like to think that, oh, they're just kids, but kids get vibes, and they know if you're being real or not. And they know if you have what your expectations are, if you are actually giving your all in that classroom and you care about their well-being and everything like that. They actually know. So it's important that if you do feel that way, try your best in the classroom to support these kids, because they can see right through it. And that's another reason why a lot of teachers experience behavior problems in the classroom. Our kids are really good at that. They know if you genuinely care or not.
It goes back to a conversation that we had, Dr. PA, right? It's
But
called being accountable and doing your job, right? We
yeah.
need people to bring it 150% every day for these
Mm-hmm.
kids because their life depends on this.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
I
get a
remember.
second chance to go back to school, right?
Exactly. Remember, we talked about that a lot. And I feel like a lot of people, if you didn't, grow up in these types of communities and you don't understand the culture and everything like that, how much weight that statement actually holds. Like, this education can mean a difference between life and death, right?
Correct.
All right. All right, so we talked about some examples of zero tolerance, and I wanted to make sure that I talked about some examples of non-negotiables. So non-negotiables are put in place to actually represent the values of an organization, all right? They serve a different purpose than zero tolerance policy. So non-negotiable values define the organizational culture and signal to everyone who works there what their individual role is and how they will be held accountable. And that's everyone, right, throughout the organization. They're not put in place to target specific individuals. Non-negotiables are put in place for the betterment of the organization. It's almost like if you have your own personal non-negotiables, things that you're going to actually accept and things that you're not willing to accept. And they're not actually tied to, say, a particular consequence or anything like that. And I just want to go over some examples of some non-negotiables that can actually be present in schools. There will be non-negotiables about how teachers collaborate, non-negotiables about what your lesson design should look like, non-negotiables about instruction, non-negotiables about how you respond to trauma in schools, non-negotiables about student learning or classroom expectations, and equity. So those are all like values that are in an organization that everybody are expected to uphold. They're not specifically tied to a consequence. And I want to make sure that we took some time out to distinguish between the two.
Dr. P, I want to quickly point out something, right? If we look at all these examples, right, and
Mm-hmm.
if every example is working together effectively, right, would you say that we have a school that's in good standing, that's moving in the right direction,
I would
right?
definitely hope so for that
Okay.
reason. For that reason. And is it possible? Most definitely. It is definitely possible. But you definitely got to be able to put the work in and make sure that you have people who are like-minded and people that are supported and people who are actually invested in our kids. And I think that's one of the major issues, right? The people who come to work and just believe this is just a job. Like these are our kids. We care about our kids. You have their lives in your hand for almost 8 hours throughout the day. So yes, I do believe that if these things were actually in place and these types of non-negotiables and everybody, actually understand and believe in it, it does make the difference.
And if you have problems or concerns with your child's school, you could look at some of these examples and you could ask the powers that be, like, what are we doing about this? How are we going to improve it? How are we going to incorporate these examples so that my child can get the best out of his education?
Going back to you don't know what you don't know, right? You got to know that it's possible first to be able to advocate for it. Because if you don't know that it's possible or that it should be there, you don't actually know what it is that you're missing out on. And our kids are actually missing out on a lot. It's possible.
Next on the agenda, why is the school to prison pipeline a problem?
All right, so I'm just gonna go through some statistics really quickly. In 1975, in the US, only 1% of schools reported having police stationed in schools. Fast forward to 2017, 2018, 36% of elementary schools had them, 67.6% of middle schools, and 72% of high schools reported having sworn officers on campus, routinely carrying a firearm. All right, so that's a huge jump from 1975 to 2018. So why is it a problem? The first thing is racial injustice. School punishments and arrests perpetuate a cycle of race-based incarceration that is devastating to communities of color. And we definitely touched on that in the beginning of this presentation. The second thing is loss of learning time. If they're not in school, they're not learning. If you want to piggyback and talk about the achievement gap or talk about learning loss from the pandemic, then that's really influential in the amount of time that they're actually in school and out of school. And I think in another slide, we talk about those number of days. So expulsion and suspension significantly impacts learning. Not being able to attend class equals loss of instructional time. And the other thing, which is what this whole presentation is based on, is future incarceration. Students who are not engaged and supported have a greater chance of dropping out, which increases their chances of future arrests. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about some of the questions for everyone, even people in our comments. What are the pros and cons of having cops in schools? So what are the good reasons and what are the bad reasons for having cops in schools today, especially considering the numbers? And that's just from 2017 to 2018.
I think one of the pros would be it gives a sense of security, right? Gives a sense of safety. One of the cons goes back to the stuff that you talked about, right? We all know what's happening in America right now between police and people of color, right? So you have to deal with those things in a school setting now, right? Is the outside that came into the inside. So that's what I have.
So should schools rely on them for enforcing behavior expectations? So should these SROs and police officers have to be the ones to actually discipline students in schools?
That's a big no for me. I
I
think
agree
it
with
goes.
that.
I think we need more structure. I think we need, if we go back a few slides to those examples, I think we need to incorporate more SEL, social emotional learning, more conflict resolution, uh, being able to deal with problems. I think we need more of that than just, having SROs enforcing, rules, zero tolerance.
Are they even trained to deal with those type of issues though? That would be my biggest question. Like you putting people in position and they're not even trained to handle that. And that's my belief. I don't know if that's facts or not, but I just can't see them trying to be disciplinary when their trained and structure is to control a crowd or control a problem if it arise. They don't know how to mediate. It's just one or two things. Like either you don't do this, or if you do this, this is what we're gonna do. They don't know how to work the middle because they're not trained to work to be a solver. It's like either I'm gonna arrest you or I'm not gonna arrest you. You leave. If you don't, I'm gonna arrest you. Period.
Correct.
And that's zero tolerance, right? There's no in between when it comes to zero tolerance. And if we talk about even teachers struggling with meeting these challenges in the classroom, how can we expect these SROs and police officers to be able to do it appropriately, especially in the school setting? And I think that's the part that really concerns me. And I do believe that in some situations, maybe, and I don't even agree with that 100%. And here is why. I believe that if schools really focus on behavior supports and really focus on social emotional learning and really focus on, training teachers and implementing those supports in the classroom and everybody being on the same page with the same mission and the same vision as far as what the expectations are for our kids, then it wouldn't be necessary. I think that putting SROs and police officers in schools is another Band-Aid approach. And you're not really dealing with the issue, which is just going to be perpetuated over and over and over again if you're unwilling to deal with it. It's just going to keep happening.
We could easily just look at our communities, right? One of the big things in the race for mayor in Buffalo, right, was about like defunding police, right? Mm-hmm. So if we have more cops, are we going to have less crime? I mean, if we look at our city now, it's not going down, right? People are still going to commit crime. I think we need the social workers, the counselors, the mental health professionals that are trained to deal with these issues, right? And it's a less threatening approach because these individuals don't have weapons on them, right? They're going to be more in tune to deal with those issues with these students.
Agreed. And and I know we touched on this a little bit, but what are the misguided beliefs about cops in schools making kids feel safe? Do we actually believe that having cops in schools actually make kids feel safer?
That's a good question.
Do you guys think that you could go either way?
I think it could go either way. And then I also think it's based off of experiences, right? If I had a negative experience with an officer, or if I seen something in my community or my family members, right? How does that play in effect when I see you in school, right? So am I to go tell you of a problem, right? When I see you in school? So I think it's going to depends on what type of experiences that individual has.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think maybe even to a certain point, them having to go through and be familiar with the expectations of the school, right? And being familiar with that community, in order to be able to do that within the school, it's not possible if they don't have the opportunity to be able to do that before even coming into the school building, unless the whole purpose is to just enforce zero tolerance.
I'm looking at some of the comments, Dr. PA. Mm-hmm. And we have Audrey saying every situation is not a crime. Steve, no adult with a gun makes me feel safe. So that's an adult letting you know how he feels, right? Mm-hmm. I feel threatened at all times.
So imagine how a kid feels.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's intimidating when there's only one person that has armor on, right? So like when we say he's the only one that's safe in the building, right?
Right. Or it can also make a student feel like they have a reason not to feel safe, right?
Correct.
Or what would be the purpose of having them there if it wasn't a threat or anything like that in place? So now I feel like I shouldn't feel safe. It could definitely go either way because he's there. He definitely serves a purpose for being there. What is that purpose?
And it's so interesting. I was telling you earlier, right? So I'm getting my hair cut and I'm at the barbershop, right? And one of the guys there, he's an officer, right? And he was telling me about how he was in the schools. And he told me how he took the time to build those relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And 2 years later, he still talks to the student who now has gone on to graduate, right? So I think if we're going to do this, it's going to take a a lot of training on how to build these relationships, how to de-escalate. What Steve is saying, de-escalation skills, right? And I also think on the other hand, we're going to need those professionals also in the schools.
Agreed. Agreed. And then our last question here, how does school punishments perpetuate a cycle of race-based incarceration? So how do the punishments that students receive in schools perpetuate a cycle of race-based incarceration?
Well, what you have pointed out so far with this presentation, right? If they're not in school, right, that could lead to further incarceration, right? And also, as we're going to see going with some later slides, how it affects girls, how it affects boys, and then across all races.
Yeah. And definitely not, especially talking about the de-escalation part, not showing students how to effectively or appropriately deal with conflict definitely perpetuates it. Because if we're just kicking them out, we're, you know, suspending them or expelling them from schools, and we're not really addressing the problem, they're never going to be able to get those skills. It's just going to continue to happen. And that is a identifier for incarceration. It's a setup.
And if they're not in school, right, learning out of a book, they're learning something, right? So if they outside in the community, who knows what they've been learning, right?
So you're really perpetuating a culture of failure instead of a culture of success. All right. Good deal.
I want everybody to pay close attention to the check marks, right? These check marks are going to be discussion points for our viewers.
All right, so I want to talk about what ESSA is before I dive into what's on this slide so that everybody's on the same page with what ESSA is. So ESSA stands for Every Student Succeeds Act. It actually replaced NCLB, which was No Child Left Behind. It was signed into law by President Obama in December 2015. The main purpose of ESSA is to make sure public schools provide a quality education for all kids. ESSA gives states more of a say in how schools account for student achievement, so a little bit more flexibility there, and it requires each state to collect and report data on discipline. And school districts, they actually have to formulate, because of this law, alternatives to suspensions and expulsions. So let's take a look at the slide for a minute. During the 2015-2016 school year, according to national estimates released by the U.S. Department of Education in May 2020, there were 11,392,474 days of instruction lost due to out-of-school suspension. Okay, and that is the equivalent of 62,596 years of instructional loss. I don't know how y'all feel about those numbers, but when I first saw it, I was just amazed by it. So the very first checkpoint is where you live determines the quality of education that you receive growing up. And I want to expand on this just for a minute, okay? If you've never walked in a suburban school and you've all your life, entire life been in a urban school, you will never know the differences that exist. So, and I may be pushing this a little bit further, but school quality actually depends on, a lot of it is state taxes, all right? You know that suburban areas have higher taxes. So that means that they have more money being funneled into their schools, all right? So that's what I mean by where you live determines ultimately the quality of education that you receive. The second checkpoint is zero tolerance policies are primarily enforced in schools with high populations of minority students, meaning you're going to see zero tolerance policies more in urban schools than you would in suburban schools, okay? Students of color are 3.5 times more likely to get suspended or expelled than their white classmates. Students at the secondary level are 5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than those at the elementary level. So that means that it is more prevalent the older that they get from this perspective. okay? Students who are expelled or suspended are more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system, and we've talked about that. There is a widespread failure by districts to report data on school policing, despite the requirements of federal law. Reminder, this is federal law. They're supposed to report this data, all right? School policy data from 2015 to 2016 was incomplete or never even collected. All right. And the last one is, wait, my last one? No, second last one. As of July 2020, not one state had fully met as a state and district report card obligation regarding their 2017-2018 school policing data. And under former Education Secretary Betsy DeVoe, the Department of Education rescinded a slate of Obama-era civil rights regulations aimed at preventing schools from disproportionately disciplining Black and Hispanic students and students with disabilities. So this is another one of those cases where if you don't know, you don't know. So we're talking about policies being in place at the federal level that are not even being followed through at the district level with schools.
I think, and one of the reasons why, right, that I could think of, right? Because if you're reporting what exactly is happening, right, that's a reflection on the administration of those schools, right? And everybody wants to keep what's happening a secret. Like, we know in our community what's going on, right? But if we don't report it, that means there's not at the federal level, because that's going to come down and actually, like, what are you doing to fix these things, right?
Don't you find it interesting how that the fact that this information isn't being reported, right? And they're not being held accountable for not reporting it, but we have zero tolerance in place to make kids responsible for behaviors. You know what I mean? That could probably be even prevented at the school level. It's just appalling to me how many days of school has been lost because of suspension or expulsion, and the type of responsibility that we're placing on these kids that we're not even being willing enough to place on school districts.
You know, another thing, I was talking to a coworker, right? And I don't want to misquote her, but I believe the number, so like if it's myself, right? If I get suspended X amount of times, right? Is that number be reported that I got suspended 12 times, or it was one individual that was being, you get what I'm saying? So I believe there's playing with numbers, the data. Yeah, this is real deep right here.
And it's probably more, because you're right. That's what's being reported, right? And how it's actually reported matters. You know, what are we doing with the data that we have? What picture are we trying to paint with it? Definitely plays a role.
And like I said, if you're not in school learning something that's supposed to better yourself, and if you're out there, like, let's just be real, right? Parents got to work, right? It may not be somebody home, right? So if that child is at home, if hopefully they're of the age and that they could be home, right? They're doing something, right? They're learning something.
And that's interesting, because one of our questions was, what happens to students who are suspended? Does suspension actually help? And what is the purpose of it, right? Of suspending a kid? Are you suspending them because you want them to learn a lesson? Are you suspending them because you don't want them in a classroom distracting other students? What's the purpose of suspension?
You know, that's a good question. Having a job where I was the one that would suspend kids and stuff like that. And I would always want to strive for, like, if I had to, of in-school suspension, right? I'd rather you be, if you got to be out of the classroom, you're in the building, I know that you're getting the work done, and so forth. But that's a deep question.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about, you know, some of the supports and things like that, because one of the questions is, what other behavior supports can schools use before actually resorting to suspension? One of the things I would definitely say, like, that should be a last resort. there's other things that you can put in place before you get to that. And Greg, you know, we have behavior plans and all sorts of things to try to get that student back on track, so that they can really do what it is that they need to do and be successful in the classroom. But at the same time, you're addressing those challenges that's preventing them from doing that. And if you can create a plan that's individualized for that student to follow through with, it will most likely prevent it from happening. But I do believe that when it is used, it should be a last resort. Like, you've tried everything else under the sun. And I know I talked about this previously, like, ask what has been done before this point? What supports have been tried? You know, what experiences have my kid had that actually led up to this, so that it can be prevented and we can actually help that child and avoid suspension. But that is a really good question. What's the point?
Are parents being informed of earlier behaviors that could lead up to the suspension, right? Like you said, what has been put in place to stop those behaviors? And I think one of the big thing, I learned this from you, right? The
What?
importance of building those relationships, right? I noticed what I put in the time of getting to know the kids and build these relationships. We saw for our own eyes
Yeah.
suspension rates decreased.
By almost half. By
And
almost half. So it's
we got
possible.
we got comments coming in. I think suspensions are vacations for the students, right?
Yeah.
It's more of a punishment for the parents or the
Yeah.
guardians, right? Because now I gotta have somebody watch you while I go to work, right?
Definitely.
Um, More suspensions are not to resolve the behavior issues. They promote enforcing of rules of no matter how major or minor, similar to the criminal justice system.
Good point. So suspension is almost like doing time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then also thinking about it, right? And I know I talked about this before in my little video, but if your child is being suspended over and over and over again, say for the same behavior, and there hasn't been anything that's been tried or any supports given, then it's ultimately going to lead to expulsion. So the purpose of suspension could be, in some cases, expulsion. Like, we just want them removed from the school so we don't have to deal with it anymore. That's the purpose. And parents need to be mindful of that, because it's setting them up for incarceration.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And then the fact that low income districts are targeted the most is also a red flag. That goes back to funding, right? And I do think funding plays a lot in it, but I also think that how you use the funds that you have actually matters, right? If you have enough funding to put the right supports in place and the right people in place for these kids to be successful, then you don't have a reason not to do it.
And I'm going to keep going back to this. I believe
But
like the structure and the culture of the school, right? If we could get those things right, right, the kids is going to buy in. They're going to want to be there. I'm going to want to see Dr. PA 5 days a week, you know?
I have a
So
purpose to
I
come to
think
school.
it goes hand in hand.
Agreed.
Definitely. And it required involvement because, like y'all keep saying, man, to know, if you don't know, you won't know what was going on. So it requires the parents also to get involved and come to these platforms and things like this and get the information. Because you will no longer be having the excuse to say, well, I didn't know this. Well, if you take the time and put the energy into this and into your child, you will know these things and y'all can be able to change these things that are happening in our neighborhoods and our community, because we already know what it is. Like, this is what it is. Like, so, but that don't mean that we got to accept it. Like, we got to get the knowledge and the information so we can start making a change. Like, to me, it seemed like we as a culture had kind of like given up, and like, we like, oh, this is what that key word, like, this is what it is. But they accept it though, like push back, like, no, that's not what it is. Let's do our homework. Let's get involved. Let's figure these things out. Let's do due diligence. Now that the information, y'all putting the information out of here, like, what's the next step? Like, okay, y'all saying like they not reporting it. Well, let's find out who job that is on the federal level that they're supposed to report to, and why ain't no zero tolerances with y'all? Like, you ain't doing your job. Then we need to get you out of office because you're not making the states do their job to give y'all this information, so this information can be highlighted and get brought to the light so people can know this is why this is happening.
There's definitely power in numbers, right?
Tony, what's so deep is that when it's not being reported, right, it appears to be like you're in school where there's no issues or concerns. So like it's hard to raise those red flags because only so many individuals know what's actually going on, right? So that's why like we got to get parents engaged. Going back to that code of contact, you got to read it, you got to understand it, you got to explain it to your kids, and you got to go like, what did you do to help my kid with this behavior, right? So like the parent got to work with the school got to work with the parent, and put a spotlight on stuff like this. Like you're right, they gotta advocate for their kids.
Mhm. Be a part of the solution and not the problem. Because I feel like by not advocating, you're perpetuating the problem. You got to decide which side you want to be on.
And I think as parents, as adults, period, though, we got to put our pride to the side. Like if you don't know, don't be scared to ask for help. You know what I mean? Like because if you don't, you're not doing a disservice to you. You're doing a disservice to your child being somebody that you can be happy for, and don't fall victim to these things that could lead to other worse or greater consequences. So
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing is pride. As our people, we have a lot of pride, but sometimes you have to put your pride down.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes in with that culture, right? So if I'm inviting, right, I'm trying to, I'm engaging you, Tony, right? I'm making you part. I'm making you welcome into the school in the community, right? It's easier for a parent to put that guard down, right? So if I don't know, and Tony, every time I come there, you're nice to me. You talk to me. You know my name and all this type of stuff. I could go to you, Tony. I really don't know. Can you explain this to me, right? It makes
Correct.
it much easier than somebody that you never. You might see a picture of the person, right? And you're not going to talk to that individual, right? So all
Correct.
talk about the culture and the community of the school.
Agreed.
Hold on, we got another comment coming in from Melva. It says, "Thank you. Our people have dropped the ball. We have to be involved. Parents have to show up ready to be articulate and advocate for their children in these schools.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Okay.
way to overturn the system that is against our kids. Parents have to be involved."
Agreed, Melva. Advocate for what's right. Instead of being reactive, be proactive. Because that's what's actually going to prevent it from happening. Instead of waiting for something to happen and then simply responding to it. That's your right as a parent. You're able to do that.
Next on the agenda, how do schools contribute to the school to prison pipeline?
Mm. All right. So in this slide, I really thought long and hard about this because I didn't want to just present one side, right? You always want to make sure that you cover both sides of the debate. And this is the zero tolerance debate, the pros and cons of it. So one of the pros after researching the topic was policies ensure that equal treatment is given to all and that a zero tolerance policy does reduce rule breaking or criminal activity, all right? A con is schools may criminalize minor disciplinary infractions, which is what we've talked about up until this point, right? Pro, prepares children for the real world. And please understand that I'm not saying that I'm agreeing with this. This is just information that I found upon researching this topic when we touched on that question so far. Whether or not zero tolerance actually prepares children for the real world, definitely don't agree with that. I don't think it does. But a con is there are occasions of misuse or that the punishment enforced can be out of proportion to a given incident. And we talked about that a lot too. Minor things can be escalated with zero tolerance. It aims to keep kids safer is a pro. Can lack common sense as may apply to harmless items. So in reality, if you don't have, this goes back to culture and everything, right? You don't have an understanding of what is common for that kid or within that community, right? That could be an issue. May be required by law. We talked about that. That was during the Reagan era. Expose children to legal charges for minor offenses. removes major offenders from school, and allows administrators to act quickly with disciplinary consequences that are consistent based on school policies. I'm sure we could definitely debate that. And discourages report of a con is it discourages report of behaviors by some that witness the breaking of the rules. So in other words, if I see that a student is behaving this way and I know that they're going to be expelled because of it, I may less likely report that is happening, because I don't want that to actually happen to the kid. So it's not going to be reported at all. All right. Oh, and I do have a quote for this one too. The American Psychological Association convened a task force to evaluate the evidence and to make appropriate recommendations regarding zero tolerance policies and practices. An extensive review of the literature found that despite a 20-year history of implementation, there are surprisingly few data that could directly test the assumptions of a zero tolerance approach to school discipline. And the data that are available tend to contradict those assumptions. How do we feel about that? So basically what it's saying is that there's no data saying that it's working, that it's serving a purpose, besides actually putting students who are that have disabilities, or students from poverty, or students of color into the prison system.
We have somebody that had a comment that said, "Wow, Dr. PA, this is like some shocking information to hear," right?
Yeah, it is. And I was actually shocked by it. So, I mean, I knew it existed. I just didn't know it was this extreme.
It make you question, like, A, why are we still doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how can we be better at finding a solution to move away from this?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the answer to A is we know why they're still doing it. Not to get too deep, but we know prison is their money maker, man. It's their way of getting slave wages without us being slaves no more. To be frank, they pay you 25 cents. That's your best job in prison. You get 25 cents an hour. That's the best job. The worst job to get people like 3 cents a day. You know what I mean? So, and
a day? Did you say 3 cents a day?
No, 3 cents an hour, but you work for like 4 hours. You know what I mean? So you might make, it's ridiculous. Yeah, it is. So that right there and we know most of the prisons are out in communities where nobody's prevalent but people of a certain race. So it makes their community thrive. It's a job security. You know what I mean? They can work there, get a lot of money. Nothing else will be going on in places where the prisons are usually placed at. Mm-hmm. I think B, like one of the things I seen, like Steve had brought up, like it says like one of the pros, they remove major offenders from schools and allow administration to act quickly with disciplinary. Well, one, why would you remove a major offender? Like sit down and talk to, we talking about kids, we're not talking about adults. Sit down and talk to that child, because obviously he's showing you skills that he's a leader, basically. Mm-hmm. So encourage that behavior, but tell him he can use it in other positive ways. Like that's like one of my biggest conflicts I had, like just a little backstory. I don't mean to go off tangent. Like when I was just incarcerated, I just came home. I always clashed with a lot of people because it was like, they used to try to tell me like the things I like to do was wrong. I was like, no, it's not wrong. I just got to find somewhere to put that energy into something else that's productive, that won't land me here to have to go through this, because y'all don't understand me, y'all don't get me. And they basically try to kill our kids' dreams by doing that. Oh, you're wrong because you're a major offender. You can get these group of kids together to act out and lash that way. Well, if he got the power to do that and the capability to do that, why won't you take him and put him a structure where he can use that energy and get the kids to do something great in the classroom?
Mm-hmm. Greg and I used to talk about this a lot. And I had to do that a lot as a teacher. You have that one kid that's in the classroom that's always, getting into trouble and everything else. But guess what? All the other kids follow that kid. You got to figure out what makes these kids follow this kid, right? And how can you channel that energy into something positive? And I think that part of the reason why a lot of teachers don't do that is, one, they probably don't know how. But the other is they don't understand and they don't have the same expectations. You have to have high expectations for our kids. If you put the bar up here, this is what our kids are going to do. If you put the bar down here, this is what our kids are going to do. And they're capable. They're definitely more than capable, because how did they get the other kids to follow them, even if they were doing the wrong thing? So you flip it, just like you said, Tony, and get them to do the right thing, and everybody else will follow. But I think that's one of the major reasons why, like what you brought up, is how a lot of our kids get lost in the system, and they don't know how to use the talents that they have. And then by the time, like right now, we're adults, right? We had somebody when we were in school at a young age saying, hey, you got all these qualities. I think you could be a great leader. Who's to say that I would not have been further than what I am today? And that's basically the difference, right?
And that's the
We have a
zero tolerance. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish, Tony.
Oh no, I was just saying that's the effect of a zero tolerance, because now you didn't put him into the streets, and like you said, what he's going to do, he's going to keep that behavior going because nobody gave him out or taught him the skills or gave him the tools necessary to show him what his capability is. You know, so basically he just played a mental game with that child already by putting him down, making him believe he's not going to be anything, and I can't succeed in this environment, and you shamed him. So he's going to transition and put that energy into something else where he feel acceptable. It was acceptable behavior, like he feel important.
The same skills that somebody on the street is using to hustle, right, can be the same skills that they use to be a business owner.
100% correct.
Excellent, excellent. We got Desi, and she says it confirms her thoughts. She really didn't want to admit it, right? She also says it explains why parents aren't notified of red flags until it becomes a problem, right? And when it becomes a major problem, it's too late. You know, it's on a child's record. You know, once you started adding stuff to records, and it blocks you from opportunities, right? And it says, thank you. We got Steve says, for that hyper kid, you could give them jobs in the classroom, hand out papers, right?
All the
right.
time. That's your person. That's your
Right on,
person right
Steve.
there.
We got Melva saying, thank you. The seeds are being planted, right?
Definitely.
We could be having good fruit being grown, or we could be having bad fruit, right? Thank you. Keep the comments coming, please.
Yes, please. Please contribute to the conversation. All right. Now, this is interesting. You're up, Greg.
Okay. Let me minimize this real quick. Now, this quote, we talked about, I said earlier about later slides, right? So it says, while discussions about the school to prison pipeline tend to focus on adolescence, many Black girls are enveloped in this cycle before they are old enough to tie their own shoes. While they make up just 20% of the nation's female preschool population, Black girls constitute 54% of female preschoolers who have received more than one out-of-school suspension. Research indicates that society falsely perceives Black children as being less innocent than their white peers, even as toddlers. As early as age 5, Black girls are viewed by adults as more knowledgeable about sex and adult topics, less in need of nurture and support. It's significantly older than they white girls of the same age. The excessive discipline Black children experience for offenses such as disruptive behavior and tantrums make them 10 times more likely to face discipline, retention, or even incarceration later in life. This is from the preschool to prison, the criminalization of Black girls. Mackenzie Chara, Dr. PA, this is wow.
It's crazy, right? And then when I really started doing the research and I saw this, the first thing that I could think of, and this is just me personally putting my thoughts out there, is why it took me so long to really practice self-care. Because society views us as adults. If society is viewing us as adults as early as age 5, just imagine the type of weight that's on our shoulders growing up and not even having the ability to understand that it's wrong, because it's perpetuated in society so much. And if you're not aware that it's happening, you know what I mean? Those red flags will just float by, until you get to a point in your life where you hit a wall. And if we don't start talking about this like right now and dealing with it right now, our kids are going to experience this, and it's going to perpetuate the problem. And if I can prevent it, I don't want our girls to actually have to go through that type of feelings, those types of feelings, and harboring those types of feelings and not understanding why, and succumbing to the pressures of our society. Because it just amazes me how you can look at a 5-year-old, right, and look at them as being grown at 5. When do they have a chance to be a kid? To live life and enjoy life as a kid, if you're in a school who perceives you as an adult in preschool?
You know, Dr. PA, it just makes you, it gives you a better understanding, right? We see with social media all of these videos of kids being in school, slammed to the floor, beaten by adults. And when I was reading this, even it took me back to like the Tamir Rice. I believe he was what, 12 with a toy gun, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're looking at us as if we're adults and and they're just babies,
Yeah. Yep,
right?
our babies at that, our babies.
You know what sticks out to me? It just shows me how systematic they are, man. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
first, it's like history repeating itself. First, they just targeted the black males. They're like, okay, go back to your stat with Reagan in the drug era, lock up all the fathers, lock up all the black males, broke
Mm-hmm.
up the homes. Boom. Now they come with the reform, or incarceration not working. We let them out, or man, we're gonna legalize this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna prison system is going down. So who they gonna attack next? The women.
Yeah.
It's like they systematically just targeting people of colors, like one by one. Like, okay, because once you start doing that, now you having women that are incarcerated, and then they having children in prison. So what's the effect that that's going to be?
Mm-hmm.
They
And
just
it's
trying
just,
to make
I'm
it
sorry.
normal as possible.
And when we think about it, like what you said, women in prison having babies, it's destroying the household, right? It's destroying families, right? And parents are not being able to parent their kids.
Yep.
And they already in the system. The father would probably be locked up. Now the mother's locked up. Now the kid is already in the system before the kid even had a chance.
And then it also blocks you from opportunities in life, right? A whole
Mm-hmm.
selection of jobs you're excluded from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This quote definitely, man, it will open up your eyes.
Mm-hmm. And it just brings me back to, is the system broken, or is it doing exactly what it was designed to do?
It's doing what you said the key word. When you say system, it lets you know it's a system. It's
Mm-hmm.
not broken. It's broken for us, but it's working for them.
Yep. Agreed.
Just you can look at, or you'll get to that when you look at the statistics later on, like how just as a whole, how our population has declined to how other races are still growing
Mm-hmm.
abundantly.
Mm-hmm.
When you do your census and see the numbers, it's just it's their system.
Yep. So you guys know we can't talk about, what it is without actually giving the numbers, right? Definitely got to do that, because I don't want people to believe that this is something that we're just making up and just saying that it actually exists. No, we're going to present you with the numbers so that you can see for yourself. If you take a look at this chart over here, you can see how it's broken down from the National Center for Education Statistics. And these are students who received out-of-school suspensions by race and ethnicity. I could only go back as far as 2013, 2014. I tried to get something more recent, but this is what I was able to find. And you can see that females are light green, males are dark green, okay? And even if you look at where it says black girls are suspended, what is that, 9.6? Even more than other males of other ethnicities and races across the board. Black males are at 17.6. And I just want to go over this quote here on the side. It says, the school to prison pipeline does not start with older children, which is what we talked about in the previous quote. The issues begin as early as preschool. While Black children are 18% of all preschool students, they account for 48% of students receiving multiple suspensions. White children, on the other hand, make up 43% of the preschool population, but just 26% of students, let me make sure. Okay, 43% of the preschool population, but just 26% of students with more than one suspension. In other words, Black children as young as 3 and 4 years old face systematic discrimination. Their discipline policies set the stage for years of discipline and established a culture of failure before Black children even begin kindergarten. And that to me is just, it's crazy if you look at that. Before they even get into kindergarten, the system starts to set them up for failure. So our first question is, what are some common misconceptions about the school to prison pipeline? And that could be anything. I made sure it was in general on purpose.
I think one of them that we thought that it was older kids, right?
Definitely see here that's definitely not the case.
One
but
for
what
me,
about the fact that is it real?
Is it real?
That's a misconception.
Yeah.
Because it is. It most definitely is. These numbers tell us that it is.
Man.
Why do you think that people think that it isn't real? Where would that even come from?
I think a lot of people just don't want to see the truth for what it is, right? Yeah. It's not a problem if it doesn't affect my household.
True.
Right?
True.
And a lot of times I think, and we know this, some people just see it as just a job, right? My 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, and I'm out of there, right?
So some people just don't care, though. If we be honest, let's just say some people just don't care. It's on us to care. We can't. It's time for us as our culture to care. We can't keep blaming nobody else. We got to step forward. And once we step forward, it'll start a movement and everything else will start. But you have to get some traction to add some value somewhere.
So true.
Agreed. So this, if you are not aware of this book, it's called Push Out, and it's by Monique W. Morris, and she really talks about the criminalization of Black girls in schools. So I thought it would be important for me to actually share this video, but I want to go over this quote from the National Women's Law Center, which says, Black girls are more than twice as likely to be suspended from school as white girls in every state due to racist and sexist stereotypes. And we just saw those numbers. So let me get this video to play. Come on, play. Let me see, y'all. Give me a minute. You're not gonna play for me?
You know, I've after hearing all those stats, and Tony, what you think? Just imagine how that child feels. Like, I wouldn't want to show up. You know,
it's like you send them to look for love in all the wrong places instead of receiving that nurture and love in the right place where a person has genuine concern and want to nurture their mind. Because we're talking about kids, so they're very impressionable. You know what I mean?
And if you think about it, they're spending a bulk of their time in school, right? If you think about that awake time, right, in school, and if it's bad, wow.
No, why this isn't there? I needed to play.
And even that though, sometimes like you kicking them out, and they might not be even in the best environment, so that might be their escape. So if you're kicking them out and automatically suspending them, you push them in an environment that might not even be safe for them there. So that might be their safety zone. Like they're not taking the time to even see that, because that should raise a flag also in the schools. So like, why isn't this parent involved? Like, where is they at? If we contact them, why ain't they getting back to us? Like, it's a job, but it also, I believe anything you do, you should have passion for, and it won't feel like a job.
Agreed. I can't get
Tone,
this video to play, guys. I'm gonna have to come back to it.
okay, but we got a question for Tony from Steve. He's curious to know about the educational system while being incarcerated.
It's the bare minimum. And unfortunately, I had two experiences of two different states of being locked up. Basically, they make you, once you get your GED, you good. Then they stop. At one point, you was allowed to get your college degree. Then they defunded that. They had a big issue about that. People had a uproar, like white people in prison are allowed to get free education in college when people in society don't be able to get it. So they stopped it. And now I'm on the west coast of Arizona. It's the bare minimum. They make you get to your 8th grade level and they just push you through. But the people that's doing it, they don't care. Like people cheating and just sliding past. So it's like if you never was taught the value of education as a youngster, you won't know what the value of it is as an adult. And then like if you got shamed while you was in it, like you're not gonna really apply yourself. Some people don't even care. Like they'll sit in there and be like, oh, if you get your GED, you get out 6 months earlier. Some people just so they don't have to be shamed. They were just like, man, I ain't doing that shit. That shit's stupid. Excuse my language. I know we live, but I'm just keeping it 100. And they'll rather just sit there for 6 months instead of going to class and asking for help. So all that is learned behavior that a lot of people like that's older that go to prison have to unlearn.
Wow.
I'm gonna have to come back to this, guys, because it's not planning. I don't want to spend a whole lot of our time trying to make it play, but she really talks to some of the girls that you see here in this video, and they talk about how they're made to feel in the classroom. And she talks about how she asked some of the girls, like, are your teachers scared of you? And some of the girls said yes, like they do believe that their teachers are actually scared of them in the classroom. And she says, and then they laugh, but in reality, how it's not, it's not funny. And that's because if we go back to what we talked about previously, if you're perceiving this young girl as actually an adult, right, then you will have a reason to be, come up with a reason in your mind that you will have to be scared of them. But as kids, how can you teach a population of kids that you're afraid of? It's not even possible. But it also shows accounts of like what Greg mentioned earlier, the girl that was thrown by an SRO out of her desk in class because I think it was because she refused to put her phone away. And that just goes back to what we talked about, how those minor offenses are turning into something bigger with zero tolerance. And the girls really talk about how they're going through their feelings and trying to understand what's happening around them without little support from school, from what's happening in schools. So hopefully I can, share it a little bit later on. But that's what it's about. It's very eye-opening to see it from the girls' perspectives about how they feel by actually going through it. All right, so I'm gonna move on to the next slide.
All right. We're talking about incarceration and how does it affect the Black community. In 2020, the incarceration rate of African Americans in local jails in the United States was 465 incarcerations per 100,000 of the population, the highest rate of any ethnicity.
Crazy. All right, so let's get to the numbers. And Tony, I think this is what you were referring to earlier. And I can't move this, but you can see the quote at the top from Kanye West. I happened to be listening to one of his songs one day while I was working out on Power, and it said, "The system broken, the school is closed, the prison's open." Now let's take a look at these numbers over here. So this is inmates by race, and this is like what you pointed out earlier, Tony, just federal prisons. I'm sure if we had state in this as well would be a lot higher, but you can see if you look at the numbers, Black number of inmates is 58,554 compared to white, which is 88,059, and that results in a 57.7% for white people in jail, and then at the federal level, and then for Black, 38.4. And that doesn't really look alarming if you look at those numbers there, but I'm gonna move this over. If you look at the statistics that I have over here from the United Census Bureau from 2021, how it's broken down by race and Hispanic origin Black or Americans or African Americans only make up 13.4% of the population, while white Americans make up 76.3%. So if you compare those numbers here, as far as how many of us are actually here to how many of us are actually in prison, it gives you a completely different perspective to look at those percentages here. Now they bring out a whole new different light of what those numbers show, because that 38.4% is coming from only people who only make up 13.4% of the population as a whole in the US. Any comments on that before I move on to the questions? All right. So what impact does incarceration have on communities of color? And I know we talked about this previously a little bit by, like, Tony, what you said. First you take the fathers out of home, then you take the mothers out of home, and now you have the system that's actually raising our kids. Is there any other things that you think, ways that prison actually impacts Black communities?
That's one of the biggest ones. I think one of the other ones that I see, like what prison does, just as a person, it desensitizes you as a person as well. Because when you're in prison, it's a cold place, and no day is guaranteed. So it shifts your mindset. When you're already going in there, you're going in there. Basically, a lot of us didn't even believe we'd make it to be alive to a certain age. So then you go to prison, you go through your rites of ritual, you become this, that, and the third. But I think you lose a piece of yourself while you're in prison. So when you get out and you transition, you come back out as a broken person. Mm-hmm. So you're even more broken than what you was before you went in, because you still, the bottom line has never been addressed. Or what issue it was that led you to end up in prison. Like it could have been like an education, how they handled you, or whatever else the reasons it was, but unless you do it as yourself, but you never really get that assistance. Nobody's never helping you. So you walk back out basically with no skills. You're on the 8th grade level. So you can't barely get a job. You got a felony. So what else are you going to do? Usually 9 times 10, the recidivism rate is very high. You end up back in the streets again. And it becomes a repeated cycle.
Oh, that's powerful, Tony. So there's no healing process taking place.
No, because how can you heal when you're in a masculine environment and every day is full of violence? It's either testosterone or violence and bravado all day. Yeah. You know what I mean? And people dealing with a lot of hurt and anger and pain that nobody want to talk about and nobody is facing because they don't have nobody to talk about it unless you look like you're weak.
Yeah. You know, another one that I just thought of was the loss of talent and gifts, right? I believe everybody got gifts, right? So if you're away in prison for X amount of time, right, that talented gift can't be shared with the world, right?
And it's a lot of talented people in prison. And you be like, you be sitting there like, yo, wow, like, bro, like, and it's crazy because you'll see the light on in people. Like, I gave the dark side, but you will see it because you do get camaraderie in there and you see things that people do, like try to apply themselves. But like I said before, like once they walk out of that gate, the picture turns black to bleak. You're getting put right back in this environment where you're not having that one-on-one or nobody to talk to. And all the odds are stacked against you.
Yeah.
So Tony, what would you say to these kids out here that think that, it's a cool place to be, that they earn some type of acknowledgement for actually going through the prison system?
It's definitely not a cool place to be, just to keep it short and sweet. First of all, whoever you listening to, if you are listening to somebody and they tell you anything other than that, then they don't have your best interest in mind. You miss out on a lot of things. You miss out on life. It's just no place. It's very inhumane. Just imagine every time somebody do come visit you, you got to basically strip down naked and bend over and let them look up your rear end when you go back. So if that alone don't deter you, I don't know what else to tell you, man. Like, just to keep it short for this situation, but it's definitely not a place where you want to go. You don't have to go. You have choices, other alternatives, and just reach out for the help. And the information is prevalent now. Like it's really no excuse now with the way so much information. If you put that energy into finding it out a solution for whatever problem you're facing, 9 times out of 10 you'll find it.
I got a question for you, Tony. What if we could go back to like say you was somewhere like in primary school, right? What do you think that could have helped you to not lead you down that road? Like let's just use school, right? Do you think what what somebody could have done, said, or engaged you that could have had deterred you?
Mm.
That, and it's funny you asked that question because it relates to this. Like, I start acting out in school, and the only thing they started doing was suspending me. So when they suspended me, guess where I was at? Outside in my neighborhood, in the block, doing everything wrong.
Yeah.
And then like you like, oh well, now it's like, yo, if they don't want me there, it's like F school. Like I'm hanging outside. So it was a learned behavior. Now I stop even care about going to school because I'm outside every day hanging out. Like I ain't got to deal with y'all anyway. Y'all don't want me here. I don't want to be there either. It's cool.
So did you have somebody that say, I'm not gonna give up on Tony? Was there like teachers or somebody in the school that was trying to pull you in the other direction?
No, not at
Wow.
all. No, I didn't have that. I can't say. Nah, it wasn't that at all. Like I said, uh, during that time in the 80s and 90s, the big thing was just to incarcerate and lock us up. And that's what they was on. Kick you out of
Wow.
school, send you on the block, and lock them up.
You know something, Tony? When I used to work in the school, and I'm not gonna say my favorite kid, but I used to like the kids that would get in trouble because the challenge of breaking down those walls, right, to get to the root of the problem. You know, I truly enjoy of going through those battles, and then finally once those walls is down, right, you get to help build up somebody where that's where they want to be. They want to be in school now, you know, and I'm sorry that somebody in your education didn't take that time to do that.
Appreciate it. Like I said, I can't say I came from a background, but that was just, and I won't blame everything on them. I have to accept my responsibilities. Like, you know what I mean? It was the actions I chose though too. So
Hmm.
even if it was, I could say I wasn't even seeking it. Like I was determined to go on the path I was determined on. It wasn't like it was no talking to me. Maybe if somebody would have, that might would have changed, but nobody was putting in that extra effort during that time.
Wow.
I'm thinking about what both of you said, and I think that is what gives us purpose, right? That is why there's a million more reasons why I could tell you why I went into education, but there's also a million more reasons why I made sure that I was in specific locations as a teacher, because I feel like we need more people like that to be able to speak up for these kids who need that extra push. Because what happens, all that talent behind bars that could be out here actually making a difference. It really hurts my heart to know that, that the system is set up that way for our students to actually fail instead of succeeding. If we can do anything about it, which we can as parents, as educators, as, members of our community, that we need to, because it can actually be prevented. So thank you for expanding on, what it was actually like, because we definitely don't want people to go that route. And one of the reasons why we decided to do this is because we really want to bring to the forefront something that was real. We want our community to be able to relate to what it is that we're talking about. And we need to actually, take that step forward to be real about it. What is it like? How could it be prevented? What can we do? And that brings us to our next slide, which is about some solutions.
Last one for today: solutions. Is it possible to close the discipline gap?
Mm. All right. So a lot of these solutions that we're going to go over, we recently talked about throughout the presentation. The first one is social emotional learning. And when it's embedded into everyday instructional practices, it helps students to manage their emotions, to develop a positive self-image, and to be accountable for their actions, and also build relationships. Okay. And that's a really big one. A lot of people think that SEL is just something like extra that they're just throwing out there, but really it can mean the difference between success and failure for our kids. The other one is restorative practices, and that's basically helping to build healthy communities and increase social capital. It decreases crime and antisocial behavior. So what it basically is supports that's set up to help students find their way through conflict in a manner that is appropriate, that they can actually use outside of school as well. The other is trauma-informed instructional practices, and that just means being aware of the baggage that our students bring into the classroom and making sure that it's being addressed throughout instruction. So it allows teachers to reflect on their teaching practices so that they can find ways to support students who have experienced trauma. And I want to make sure that I say that when I talk about trauma, I'm not just collectively talking about students of color, because trauma is not discriminatory. All right. And the other is training teachers in proactive behavior management strategies. It's very simple. You want to try to address the issue before it actually becomes an issue. And there's ways that it can be done in the classroom. And it helps teachers to prevent problematic behaviors before they even happen, so that it doesn't impact learning at all. We keep students in the classroom, we keep them there learning so that they can be successful. All right, and the other ones are community partnerships, building relationships with people within the community, having them come into schools and support students, all right? It allows leaders and organizations within the community to support students in schools. How can they do it? Mentoring, financial support, after school programs, different ways that they can support schools. Parent advocacy, you guys know that we really hit home on this one. Parents can speak up on behalf of their child in order to ensure that they get the services that they need to be successful in school and that they're being treated fairly in school. Student voice, and I talked about this a lot with my accountability partners, and it's, teachers are sometimes hesitant to let students speak up, but student voice is important because it gives them the opportunity to engage, especially those groups of students who are marginalized, and it gives them the opportunity to express their values, opinions, beliefs, and perspectives so that they actually feel that they're a part of the school community, that their voice actually matters. And then the other one is increasing the number of social workers and mental health professionals in schools. Put them there. If you're going to invest money into, bringing SROs into the school system, why not increase the number, use that money to put social workers and mental health professionals there to support them, to help them navigate their ways through the challenges that they're facing so that they don't end up a victim to the school to prison pipeline. So social workers working within school systems provide services to students to enhance their emotional well-being and improve their academic performance. So these are just some solutions. A lot of these things we offer as part of PA and Associates. I know you guys see me posting it on our page and everything like that, but we really want to give this presentation today to show you why it is actually important to take advantage of what it is that we offer if you need those services, because there are ways to navigate your way through the system to ensure that your child gets the education that your child deserves. Greg, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I think this was a great discussion. This basically summarized why we do what we do, right? And where the love and passion comes from to be assistance to families and schools. I want to thank Tony. Wow, it was excellent, and that's it for me.
Tony, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I just want to thank y'all for giving me the opportunity. I ain't gonna hold you. I was a little nervous, but it is what it is. I'm very transparent now in my life and where I'm at, so I'm not afraid to admit that I was a little nervous about it, but it is what it is. Only way you get unnervous and uncomfortable in a situation is just attack it. I'm a firm believer in now that you have the knowledge, just don't sit on it. I hope the parents and everybody else take the knowledge and take action. Because if you got the knowledge and don't take action, it's just like the same thing as not having the knowledge.
Agreed.
Tony, real quick, man. We just got a comment come in from Trey. He want to know what you're nervous for.
Uncomfortable, man. I'm used to living a certain way in a certain lifestyle, and the transition is it's very, very, I would say, entertaining, man. just getting used to normal routines and everyday things that new problems and how I face it and how I have to solve it instead of just running. It's me versus me. So it's like sometimes I'll be nervous about when I see the greatness that I have in me, and it took me a long time to recognize it. So
I think you made me think about what my coach always tells me: growth is uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing, right? And I'm sure all of us had our, thoughts coming into this, but I was actually excited. I was like, no, I'm gonna do fine. I got them on there with me, so we'll do great. And I think that we did, especially with getting the message out there and communicating that message so that everybody can understand that we're coming from a good place and that we really want to see some changes start to happen.
Definitely, and we got to have you back, Tony.
Yeah.
The more you do it, the more you do it, it's going to become easy.
Man, anytime is a pleasure, man. I'm an open book, man. I ain't got nothing. I ain't got nothing that I'm ashamed of in my life. So
yeah, man. And
let me take that back. I have done things that I'm ashamed of in my life, but I'm transparent with it. So I'm not ashamed to talk about it. Because we all have mistakes in life that you might not be proud of the decisions you made, but it's life.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, we'd like to take this time to thank our viewers. Thank you for contributing to the conversation, being a part of these topics, and we'll look forward to our next one.
All right. Bye.
All right.